Surah Az-Zukhruf. Surah Az-Zukhruf consists of 89 verses including the Makkiyyah surahs, revealed after Surah Asy Syuura. It is called Az-Zukhruf, which means jewelry, taken from the words of Az-Zukhruf found in verse 35 of this chapter. The polytheists measure the high and low status of a person depending on the jewelry and possessions that he has. Because Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was an orphan and poor, they believed he did not deserve to be appointed by Allah as an apostle and prophet. They thought the rank of apostle and prophet should be given to the rich. This verse emphasizes that wealth cannot be used as a basis for measuring the high and low status of a person because wealth is an ornament of worldly life, not necessarily the pleasure of the afterlife. The main contents of Surah Az-Zukhruf. The characteristics of the Qur'an. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 1 to 8. The Al-Qur'an is a clear book and was revealed in Arabic so that it can be understood. The Qur'an is in Lauh Mahfuzh with Allah, high in value and full of wisdom. Allah rebuked the transgressive people and asked whether he would restrain the revelation of the Qur'an because of their behavior. Allah reminds us that many previous prophets had been sent to previous peoples, but were always blamed. As a result, Allah destroyed those who were stronger than them, and showed examples of the destruction of previous peoples as a warning. The polytheists' confession that Allah is the creator of heaven and earth. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 9 to 15. Allah is the almighty and all-knowing being who created the heavens, the earth, and everything in it. He made the earth a dwelling place, sent down water from the sky to revive the dead land, created creatures in pairs, and provided ships and livestock for humans. Humans should remember God's favor, acknowledge His power, and realize that they will return to Him. However, some people deny God's favors by making some of His servants as part of Him, even though humans are actually deniers of God's real favors. The dislike of the polytheists for daughters. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 16 to 19. These verses highlight the decision of the polytheists who felt insulted when they were given the news of the birth of a girl, while they chose a boy for themselves. Allah rebukes this deviant practice, asking whether it is fitting for Him to choose a boy for mankind, while they belittled the girls. In addition, the verses highlight the arrogance of the polytheists who consider the angels to be female creatures, even though they have no clear evidence for their belief. They will be held accountable for the false testimony they made. The polytheists' denial of holding firmly to old traditions. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 20 to 25. These verses describe the reluctance of polytheists to worship Allah alone, by doubting His will and only speculating without certain knowledge. They rejected the Qur'an because it followed the traditions of their ancestors, even though they were faced with warnings that brought better guidance. When they remained defiant, they were destroyed as a result of their rejection of the truth conveyed by the apostle. The end of those who deny the truth is a lesson for all not to follow in the footsteps of those who reject Allah's guidance. Ibrahim broke away from his father's worship. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 26 to 30. These verses describe Ibrahim declaring his freedom from the worship of his father and his people, except worshipping Allah who created him, confident that only Allah will give him guidance. Ibrahim made monotheism an eternal sentence for his descendants, so that they would return to the truth. Allah gave them and their ancestors the enjoyment of life, until the truth of the Qur'an came to them, along with a messenger who gave an explanation. However, when the truth of the Qur'an came to them, they rejected it, calling it magic and denying it. Prophetic grace that only Allah knows. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 31 to 35. These verses describe the reluctance of polytheists to worship Allah alone, by doubting His will, and only speculating without certain knowledge. They rejected the Qur'an because it followed the traditions of their ancestors, even though they were faced with warnings that brought better guidance. When they remained defiant, they were destroyed as a result of their rejection of the truth conveyed by the apostle. The end of those who deny the truth is a lesson for all not to follow in the footsteps of those who reject Allah's guidance. Allah's allowance of Satan who accompanies those who turn away from the Qur'an. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf verses 36 to 45. These verses describe the consequences for those who turn away from Allah's teachings, where Satan will lead them astray and always accompany them, preventing them from the right path. Even though they think that they are guided on the day of resurrection, those who turn away will regret their mistakes and realize that Satan is the worst of companions. At that time, regret will not be of any benefit because they have wronged themselves and are partners in punishment. Allah emphasized that Prophet Muhammad could not make the deaf hear the truth or give guidance to the blind who remain in error. Allah emphasized that if Prophet Muhammad died before victory, they would still be rewarded, and emphasized his power over them and the importance of holding fast to the Qur'an, which is the glory of the Prophet and his people, who will later be asked to account. Pharaoh's destruction as a lesson for the people who came later. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 46 to 56. These verses tell the story of God's messenger Moses, who was sent to Pharaoh and the leaders of his people to bring God's miracles. Even though Moses declared himself to be the messenger of the God of the worlds, they laughed at him when Moses brought miracles. Allah showed them great miracles and inflicted punishment so that they would return to the right path. Even though Pharaoh and his people asked Moses to pray so that the punishment would be removed, after the punishment was lifted, they broke their promise. Pharaoh felt better than Moses and influenced his people to obey him, so that they became one of the wicked people. As a result of their anger, Allah drowned them as a lesson for the next generation. Prophet Isa's invitation for his people to worship only Allah. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 57 to 67. These verses tell the story of the Quraysh people's reaction to the parable of Mary's son Isa, which was used as a lesson for the descendants of Israel. Although Isa was only a servant who was given prophethood by Allah, they quarreled and cheered, questioning who was better, their gods or Prophet Isa. Allah emphasized that Prophet Isa was a sign of the coming of the Day of Judgment and called to follow his guidance without hesitation. Prophet Isa came with clear evidence and invited people to fear Allah. The Jewish and Christian groups disagreed, and the wrongdoers will be miserable on the Day of Judgment. The Day of Judgment will come suddenly for the unbelievers who are unaware of it, and on that day, close friends will be enemies except for the pious people. The happiness of the inhabitants of heaven and the misery of the inhabitants of hell. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 68 to 77. For people who believe in the verses of Allah and are submissive as Muslims, they do not need to be afraid or sad on the Day of Judgment. They will enter heaven with their partner, be given gold plates and glasses, and get everything their heart desires, and that is beautiful to their eyes, with eternal happiness in it. Heaven is a legacy for them because of the good deeds they have done. In heaven they will enjoy abundant fruits. On the other hand, disobedient people will remain eternally in the punishment of hell, without any relief, feeling hopeless and asking to be killed, but their condition will remain eternal in that punishment. Allah confirms that they themselves are unjust towards themselves. The Meccans' denial of the truth brought by the apostle. It is mentioned in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 78 to 80. Allah states that he has brought the truth to humans, but most of them hate the truth. Even though humans plan evil plots, Allah also has his plan to overcome those plots. Allah confirms that he hears the secrets and whispers of humans, and his angels record all human deeds with him. The Qur'an refutes the belief that God has children. It is stated in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verses 81 to 89. Allah ordered the Prophet Muhammad to state that if God had a child, then the Prophet Muhammad would be the first person to worship that child. Allah is most holy as the owner of the heavens and the earth, and of what they attribute. People who reject the truth will sink into error and play around in the world until the Day of Judgment arrives. Allah is the God who is worshipped in the heavens and the earth, the all-wise and the all-knowing, has the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, and the knowledge of the Day of Judgment. Gods other than Allah cannot intercede except those who testify with monotheism. Even though they acknowledge Allah as the Creator, they still turn away. The Prophet Muhammad was asked to turn away from them and say hello because they were a people who did not believe and would later know their bad fate. Conclusion of Surah Az-Zukhruf. Surah Az-Zukhruf begins with an affirmation that the Qur'an is a divine revelation taken from Lawah Mahfuzh, followed by an explanation of the attitude of polytheists towards the prophets and the wisdom of Allah bestowed on humans. This chapter describes the nature of polytheists who like to invent falsehood, are arrogant, and ignore warnings about the fate of previous people who disobeyed Allah. Considering the actions of those who prioritize jewelry and worldliness, this chapter closes with Allah's command that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, turn away from polytheists, who will feel the truth of Allah's threat. In the context of faith, this chapter states that the Qur'an comes from Lauh Mahfuzh and confirms that the Prophet Isa, Alaihi Salam, was a servant of Allah, and recognizes Allah as the true God without children. The laws outlined include the command to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to stay away from people who do not believe. The stories told include the Prophets Ibrahim, Alaihi Salam, Musa, Alaihi Salam, and Isa, Alaihi Salam, as a comparison for the Prophet Muhammad, Shalallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in facing the difficulties of preaching. In addition, this surah records the Meccan polytheists' confession that Allah created the heavens and the earth, even though they continued to worship idols, as well as their rejection of the false belief that angels were the sons of Allah. Ridicule and insults towards the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by his people were considered normal, because the previous apostles also experienced the same thing. Polytheists are very attached to the traditions and customs of their ancestors, so that their hearts are closed to accepting the truth.